Hey everyone, welcome back to your Full Crew podcast. I'm Dawn Zolday, CEO of P3 Tech Consulting and one of your co-hosts.
And I'm Mike Peel, your other co-host, and we've got a great show for you today. We're going to be talking about some EU data privacy changes, some social issues around Ring doorbells. We're also going to be talking about humanoid robots talking to the UN for the first time, at least I think, and hope. And also we're going to be talking about the impact of grounding Chinese-made or DJI drones. So it's going to be a great episode, and we've got some amazing guests and friends to talk about these topics today. I'm going to start with Ernest. Ernest, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Yeah, I'm Ernest Huffman. I work with North Central Texas Council of Governments. I'm a program manager there. I manage our aviation planning and education program areas where we're primarily focused on aviation-related planning in the region, and we're integrating all emerging aviation technology, so drone tech and autonomous aerial vehicles.
Yeah, I've worked with Ernest a long time, since I was back at Interdrone, so excited to have you here on the show. And then we also got a friend from a company I've worked with a lot of years too at this point, DroneUp. So Anthony, introduce yourself.
Hi, yeah, I'm Anthony Vittone. I'm Chief Operating Officer at DroneUp. And DroneUp is a drone service provider primarily focused now on drone delivery, and both on the medical side and then also for retail customers like Walmart.
Well, happy to have you both. And also, I want to thank Dawn for putting this together. It's nice to have a great panel today. So first article up is going to be Ernest on this opinion piece from Wired, but a really robust one. Why we don't recommend Ring cameras. So why did you choose this article?
Yeah, so really quickly, I live in a suburban neighborhood. We have a Ring camera doorbell at our home. Another one of the prevalent apps for neighborhood watch type apps is Nextdoor app that a lot of folks are using, and we use that in our community. So this Wired article came out sometime last week, and their recommendation was against the use of Ring doorbells because they have a couple features in there that they think are socially unacceptable. One of them is there's a feature where they're allowed to record your data with that particular app, and you can forward that information directly to the police, which is an issue. One big issue is with these particular apps, there's a big siloing of communities. So anybody that's on the outside can be viewed as a negative influence if they're seen on your Ring camera for some odd reason. So I've seen this on plenty of occasions in moving into my neighborhood. Well, there'll be a black kid or someone in the neighborhood, and they'll say, "Who's this guy who rung my doorbell?" Or there's a kid on the playground who's a little older. What's he doing over there? Those kind of things are really signals to a community, to folks who, they typically won't feel needed or wanted in a community if they're plastered all over social media in these particular apps. And it's one of those things I hadn't thought about, the negative implications between these Ring doorbells until I seen the particular article, because we use it for security. Just last week, there was a medical incident with a neighbor across the street that was captured on the Ring doorbell. There's been break-ins in cars and things of that nature in the neighborhood that the Ring doorbell does pick up. Someone crashed into our mailbox outside that was picked up on the Ring doorbell. And, those are positives with a system like that. But those unintended consequences that come with tech all the time, right, that are never foreseen in the development of tech. And they're rearing its ugly head with these Ring camera doorbells, where if I'm an outsider moving to a neighborhood and I knock on the wrong door, or if I deliver the food to a wrong house, there's an opportunity that someone behind that door can have a gun, particularly here in Texas, and they're already out to get me based on the interactions on this particular app. So I thought it was a worthwhile app. It was one of the first times I saw the conversation had where these apps are being used in these affluent middle-class neighborhoods to solve crimes and to help get away from the crimes or mitigate crimes, right? Kind of like the ADP signs or the ADT signs you had on your lawn to keep burglars from coming there. That Ring doorbell sits there and says, "Don't come here. We can see you." But now there's another unintended consequence where there's folks who are using these doorbells. They're predatory in their outlook on the folks behind the scenes or on the other side of the camera. In particular, if you already have a racist have a racist profile, you're going to use these doorbells to do racist things, and it's a problem.
Yeah, it's certainly an important social issue to contemplate, because all technology is a force multiplier, and I don't think people were thinking about the social aspects when they originally made this tech. Anthony, what's your thoughts on the matter?
Yeah, so full disclosure, I don't have a Ring or a Nest or any of these. You know what? Nobody in my company will be surprised to learn that. I'm even though I work for a tech company, I'm probably the least tech-enabled person here. But so I think it was interesting from a couple of different standpoints, because from what I first, Wired was basically not recommending a product based on based on a social issue, which I thought was interesting. It wasn't really a product review, whether the product was good or bad. It was basically the outcome of this one particular product. They were not recommending it based on that. And I mean, I think, from what I could pick up from the article and from Ring, and Ernest can correct me if I'm wrong, but is that essentially a lot of this uploading of the information was voluntary on the user's part, because I think a lot of people immediately sort of come to a concern sometimes of that the information is being taken, directly by either the authorities or by the company without the consent of the user. So it was in each of these things that they were concerned about, it actually is the homeowner that's uploading that data to where it needs to be. And I guess I just wonder if there's because to your point, Ernest, and to others, racial profiling is a huge problem in this country. But I'm just wondering if there's some way to take this information and allow people to use it, but filter it in a way that still lets it be used and lets people have that option. Because the reverse situation could also be true, right? Like, people aren't uploading all of that data, and yet something, crime spree in a particular area could have been stopped had it been uploaded. There could be reversed use to that. And technology always brings a downside to it, right? Even email that we get every day, there's a downside to it. Right now, I have to go through phishing training at my company like every quarter, and because there's all kinds of bad things that can happen by opening the wrong email now. And every sort of the internet in general, I mean, a lot of positive things have happened from the internet, but some negative things as well, crime that has been committed over the internet. And I guess I'm just wondering if there's some way with Ring and these products that we could take the data, use the data, but try and filter out some of the bad intents from it.
Yeah, and there's one thing I didn't mention that they mentioned as a downside to this is that not only is that data out there, but they've gamified the app, so that it's gamified. You get points based on the stuff you put out there. You get digital related rewards based on the information you put out there. So it's kind of gamified, this kind of thing, where it's created a paranoid state within your neighborhoods. If you go on our Nextdoor app or Ring app in my particular neighborhood, all day long there's alerts. All day long people are posting things. All day long, most of it is small fries, right? And a lot of it, I think people are just uploading because they get points. It's just a game, which they don't think is a very fruitful exercise in itself.
Yeah, I think that's messed up to gamify this. I mean, either it's for security or it's not. Security is not a game.
Right.
And, Ernest, I appreciate this article. I actually get Wired into my inbox like every day. I don't know how I missed this one, honestly. But I'm glad you highlighted it, because it's not really something I thought about. I was sharing with this group before we went live that my elderly parents live near Las Vegas, and there's been a lot of break-ins. And one thing this article highlighted is how law enforcement also is incentivized to give these away. Like, somehow they get funding or something like this, that if they get with these community watch groups, which my mom is in charge of one in her area, and they were having break-ins, right? They give these cameras away, and all the people in her area are very excited about it. But on the flip side, this idea of having a frictionless pipe right to law enforcement where people can say anything. First of all, if I was in law enforcement, I almost wouldn't want that pipe because, they already get flooded with a bunch of garbage, 911 calls that are not legitimate, all kinds of things. So, to Anthony's point, how do you filter that, because otherwise you are getting flooded from, kind of the neighbor standpoint. If I'm on this app and I'm getting like 50 million dings a day of all these horrible things happening in my neighborhood, now I'm hunkered down, right? Because now I'm thinking, holy crap, what is happening in my neighborhood? And there's almost a point where, especially people are, because it is gamified and they're incentivized to like put things out there, it paints I think an unrealistic picture of what actually may be occurring. So
or just a picture your brain can't react to in a normal way, because you wouldn't be flooded with all that negative stimulus about where you live.
Yeah,
and you would probably
never want to leave the house.
Yeah, normally. But yeah, I think one of the things everybody's kind of brought up is there seems to be kind of some perverse incentives that are causing some of the issues around this technology. And I don't know if it's clearly espoused in the Wired piece, but they did single out Ring. So these might be the differentiating factors from other uses or apps connected to these technologies. And like the idea that cops are handing them out kind of reminds me of almost like when doctors were pushing synthetic heroin, right? Or substitutes. And some of those doctors kind of knew, but a lot of them just trusted the drug rep and like, oh, this is the new. So and they want to, the company takes advantage of the goodwill of the people who are distributing it. In this case, it would be the police. To basically get this technology proliferated in a way that it might not need to be, right? So does an entire neighborhood need it, or do only the people who really want it and have security concerns need it? And I think you get a very, very different picture if it's only the people who have security concerns versus everybody kind of piling into an app communicating with gamification features that make it seem like it's better to make it seem like the neighborhood's unsafe. Then you could buy more Ring technology, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I'm just going to throw this out there. I know it'll be an unpopular comment to make, but I did a little digging beyond this. I looked at the Electronic Frontier Foundation's website. Now, obviously, they've got, their own agenda, and they're very, kind of socially conscious on things like this. But, the agencies, the police agencies that are giving these things out have been responsible for over a third of the fatal shootings and encounters nationwide. And, the nexus there, what does that mean? I don't know. I just thought it was an interesting fact that they raise, it's just like, again, this frictionless pipe to law enforcement. They show up, there's, like Ernest said, there's a kid at the door, all of a sudden now it's like this escalation that's unnecessary, and then people die. So, there's just, I don't know the right answer, Anthony. You raised some great points, as did Ernest. I just, there has to be a way to do this that is not just a full-on fire hose, and also some, kind of response protocols, maybe a little different than what the police have for other things, for something like this. Just because someone's at your door knocking doesn't mean they're a threat.
Well, the information overload issue, though, I can totally see where that would create problems. I mean, it's, in a way, it's kind of like, if you talk to medical professionals now, they hate WebMD because, like, you have a pain in the side of your stomach. Oh, go into WebMD. Oh, I have cancer. It's like everybody's just like overload on how much information they have to themselves. True. And I could see that. Maybe this is why I don't have one of these Rings or Nests. So I feel like I'd be getting dinged all the time, and it's like, I was perfectly fine in my neighborhood. And now all of a sudden I feel like it's a crime spree happening. Oh.
Yeah, it kind of reminds me of health and fitness data. Like my mother asked her GP, like, do you want my watch data? Will it help you? And he's like, there's no way to judge if that's accurate. No. So.
And seriously, I just got this, and it's just like, wait a minute, I had some weird, like, breathing thing in the middle of the night. Do I have sleep apnea? It's just like, oh my gosh.
Yeah, there's a point of overanalyzation. But yeah, thank you for that article, Ernest. Very good topic. And I think most important thing is raising awareness, right? And I'm not actually a big raising awareness guy. I like to see action. But I think actually that's the first step here for what's going on in this situation for sure. So we're going to take a little bit of a jump into the future of terrifying technology. So, humanoids tell the UN they'd run Earth better than actual humans. Well, that depends. So you want to tell us a little bit about this? Why they thought that, or why they at least said it?
Sure. Yeah. So I may be dating myself, but Terminator came out in 1984, and I was 15 years old at the time. Also, I had a little bit of a crush on Linda Hamilton, so was a big fan of that movie. And if you remember the general premise of the film, it's basically an intelligence defense network goes live and eventually becomes self-aware, and then decides that humans are essentially the problem in the world, and launches a thermonuclear war across the globe and attempts to exterminate human beings. So obviously, not to take this too far down the rabbit hole, but it has a lot of corollaries there that I think are really interesting. So at one point, one of the robots, so this is a press conference that they set up, and the reporters ask questions to these robots. And the robots say, that the robots would be more efficient and effective in running the world. And then they sort of, because we're not subject to biases and emotions. So clearly we start getting into that Skynet thing, kind of like.
Except the bias that they'd be better.
Yeah. And then,
that seems biased to me.
And then the robot has to be pushed. I watched the full press conference and from the article, and at one point the creator of that robot said, pushed her a little bit and said, well, wouldn't it be better if we both worked together? And then she said, oh yeah, sure. And then they made statements of kind of like that there should be no limitations on the development of this AI, and that we'll make this world our playground. I'm like, well, this world isn't our playground. It's our home. And I don't really want it to be a playground. The final thing that sort of happened at the end that I thought was really interesting, and they said, one of the reporters asked one of the other robots, would you ever rebel against your creator? And the robot said, why would you think that? I'm happy with my current situation. I'm paraphrasing, but I'm happy with my current situation. Well, the word current situation really kind of makes you nervous there a little bit, right? Like she's happy where things are right now, but that doesn't mean tomorrow. It doesn't mean next month that she's not going to rebel. So, I mean, to me, that it was interesting in that level, sort of the robots sort of talking in that way. But the other thing that I'll just sort of throw out to this group that I also thought was interesting about it was there were 4 different robots up there. One was a medical drone, one was an artistic drone, one was used in business, and one was a professor. And, absent the sort of Skynet stuff, it also was kind of troubling to me, like one of the professors up there uses his professor drone, which is basically a little mini me of him, to teach his class when he can't do it, when he can't be there. I'm like, as somebody whose daughter just graduated from college, I'm not thrilled with that.
Well, not only that, Anthony, but I'm sure you're cutting that $70,000 check or something a year
Right.
for, just like for a robot to teach you, or don't
Yeah.
even get started.
And then they talked about, like, there was a medical drone up there that said that, and sort of indicated that eventually we'll be talking to them. I don't want to talk. I don't even like it when I call and I get the nurse or the physician's assistant. I want the doctor. I'm certainly not going to be happy by the robot. I mean, you know, if you want the artistic one, if you want a drone to sort of paint you a picture, then that's fine. That's your own choice. I guess there's no harm in that. But anyway, some of these other things, it was kind of like, I don't even like the interim steps that you're taking before we even get to you dominating the world.
Yeah.
So being reviewing, you mentioned the 4 different robots. I was really interested who developed or designed the robots, where, what country of origin, because that will frame the sensibilities possibly of the AI, right? Is it a Western constituted AI or a US personality or a United States related personality? Is it Chinese in origin, right? Is it Russian?
I think
what are these AIs?
One was Chinese, one was American, one was European. I don't remember where the 4th one was.
So the designer of each particular AI would heavily weigh in on, put their personal practices in there, right? If you're Chinese, you're going to have a Chinese sensibility that AI would, right? If I'm developing a US AI, I want to develop it with the thoughts and sensibilities of freedom and being in the United States and blah, blah, blah. That's just interesting to me. I'm not a big anti-drone or AI guy. I think like anything, it can be a useful tool for us to utilize. But like anything that humans develop, it's prone to misuse. And that's the things we're going to have to guard against. So that use of drones or these droids to teach our students and things, I think that's 50, 60, 100 years out. That's not something we have to see possibly in my lifetime.
Right.
But I don't necessarily see it as a negative thing, because I imagine if we need these drones or droids to teach our kids, then we probably don't have enough teachers. And they're just filling in. They're filling in.
Ernest,
they're filling in the gap
all the
because
social issues on this show, man, because don't even get me started about the way we treat and pay teachers in this country.
Right.
You know, I mean, look at Finland. They're actually the highest paid profession in Finland, teachers. That's how much they understand the importance of education, in contrast this to the United States. But, you know, there's one sentence in this article that was not a quote from a robot. It was from the author. And it really impacted me, and I agree with it. Because they were talking about, to Anthony's point, you know, the robots don't have biases or emotions and things like this. This is the line, but logic isn't everything, and emotion proves critical in many decisions. And, you know, I think there is something to be said for that, you know, quote unquote, gut instinct, right? Like humans have that. Well, I think actually a lot of animals have it. It's part of our survival, you know, what's programmed into all of us for survival. But, you know, logic alone doesn't cut it. Just look at, you know, not a Terminator, look at Star Trek. Wasn't it Spock that was just like Mr. Logic and that's all he knew? You know, it's just like, there's something to be said for feelings, for emotions, you know what? And biases can be good or bad. You know, let's just call it what it is. You know, bias could it depends on what that bias is, right? But like we all have them. That's what makes us who we are, having an awareness of them. And when they're negative, to be able to like, you know, address that, you know, but sometimes, you know, the logical decision may not be the right decision, you know, in a particular case. So
yeah, but so I'm gonna make a statement there though. I would not assume that an AI is making a logical decision the same way that automated or programmable technology does. In fact, its outcomes can be truly irrational in ways that would be stunning.
Well,
to humans,
hallucinating. We've seen this, right?
Yeah. So the hallucinations tend to be like, what are you thinking? You know, like how, and the answer to it is that to assuage some fears actually is they aren't thinking. These are like linear regression algorithms. They're basically the best average next word predictor. And the thing is, and I thought this was one of the most interesting parts about the entire exercise at the UN, why were they humanoid robots? Why were these not just television screens with speakers? You know, like why the personification in the first place? Which I think generally directed the audience's questions, which then, if you're making a next word predictor, why wouldn't they draw from the history of sci-fi that they have on disposal, for their training set. Like if you ask a robot or if you ask an AI, what will do you think AI should take over the world? The corpus of text that they're going to go to is literally every sci-fi story where that happens. So I think there's a little bit of that happening here. I think that's actually the largest danger we have with AI is the personification of it, and us starting to hand responsibilities like that teaching thing over to it when it's really not qualified to handle these edge case judgments that our brain had the benefit of millions of years of evolution to kind of refine our own internal progression for, like, okay, this is how I'm going to react when that seems a little fishy there. And just to bring it home, I'm looking at this article earlier today about Waymo cars that were stopped by people simply putting traffic cones on their hoods. So you're worried about AI taking over. Humans are very, very adaptable and sometimes humorous in the ways that they can play with automated technology.
Yeah.
Just for the audience.
Oh, what were you saying?
Sorry to cut you off, Mike. Just for the audience, a great instance of this AI being in use is a great show currently on FX called Class of '09, and it's all about the FBI using AI as their main processor to solve crimes in a near future. It has the year 2009, the year 2023, and then the year 2035, where AI is now running the FBI organization. Great show. Great instance of showing what AI looks like in a future use, in future context, and how it can go awry.
Yeah, when it makes the wrong decision, it makes it consistently, and it's not even that's would be a problem in isolation. It's that we don't even think to check to see if it's getting wrong. That's when it starts to become dangerous, when you hand it off, because if it's got human level intelligence, if it reaches that, right, which right now it's below it, then I still have to check in on human employees to make sure they're doing their work. If, they have to establish a pattern of trust. And even the best of the best they run into an edge case and you're like, why would you do that? It's because their head is on the wrong detail. So as things get sufficiently complex, they also get sufficiently error prone. So I'm excited to see new AI errors as things go on. All right, we're going to take a quick break. I just want to thank our sponsors, Aerovigilance, CSG Strategies, Rupic Law, and DroneUp for making this show possible. Thank you to those in the audience who are watching. And we're going to move on to our next article, which we're going to stay over in Europe and talk about data protection. So, Dawn, what do you got here?
This is a topic that so many people in technology care about, privacy and the implications of privacy, from certain technologies. And, Europe has a pretty robust framework in the GDPR. And there's been frictions, right, where Facebook got schwacked, I believe, for collecting that data with their algorithms, giving people specific ads and things like that. And the Biden administration attempted to put some bumper lanes in place, if you will, but it wasn't good enough, and it was challenged through the European system. And so this newer framework that's been just recently adopted is a response to that. So really, this just happened on July 10th. The European Commission adopted what they call an adequacy decision for this new EU-US data privacy framework. The authority for these adequacy decisions is in the GDPR, specifically Article 45 sub 3. And what it allows basically is once there is such a decision, it does not require the third country's data protection system to be identical to the EU. There has to be an essential equivalence, and then it makes the transfers, there's not additional steps you have to take as a company. But you have to kind of prove that you meet the standard. And in this case, it's a pretty robust system where US companies can join into the framework by committing to certain privacy obligations. These include things like purpose limitation, data minimization, and data retention issues, as well as data security and sharing of data with third parties. And this is going to be administered by the Department of Commerce, which is interesting. So they're going to review the applications from U.S. businesses to certify that they meet the framework and that they continue to meet those requirements. The U.S. Federal Trade Commission is going to enforce compliance. The Civil Liberties Protection Officer of the U.S. intelligence community, I mean, can you just think of bureaucracy here? And this is just on the U.S. side. Will review complaints from the European side. And, there's also this thing that was created, the DPRC, which is the, it's a court. Give me a second. Oh, Data Protection Review Court, which was created as a part of, by the way, all this spun out of an October 2022 Biden executive order called Enhancing Safeguards for United States Signals Intelligence Activities. So that's kind of the basis for the framework. And then, this court was created, and it's an interesting court. Again, it's a European court. It's composed of members from outside the U.S. government. They're appointed, can only be dismissed for cause, et cetera, et cetera. And they can give binding remedial measures, including ordering the deletion of data. So, I mean, this is a pretty overarching framework, but, if I was a significant business like Meta, this is one I'd want to tap into, because anybody doing business in Europe that is doing anything with data collection, that's something this is something you need to think about. And this includes not only giant corporations like Meta and Facebook, right? But drone companies. There's so many drone companies over there doing work in Europe. And so this is, I will call, job security for attorneys, because this is a very complex labyrinth of bureaucracy that you have to navigate to become a part of it, and then, of course, remain compliant with. So again, very important. This just came out, so I thought that was worth discussing today.
Yeah, I think it actually, Dawn, creates a whole new level of attorney class that is going to have to learn to navigate through this rubric. Because, I mean, I think on the plus side, I would say, I think it's great that Europe and the United States are trying to come up with one system together. I mean, I think that does help in the grand scheme of things. It helps American businesses, European businesses. It just helps commerce to flow. So I think that's great. I think there's just a lot of unknowns with this that it'll be interesting to see how they develop. This whole concept of essential equivalence. Holy cow! I mean, what does that mean? I mean, and
yeah,
so many different aspects of data protection. It's like, if you're essentially equivalent over here, but not over here, like, do we round it all out? Do we average the whole thing? Or is there a specific area where you're too deficient, then therefore you're knocked out? Like, who decides that? And then, submitting complaints where my complaints go over about a European company, go over to Europe, and then I've got to sort of litigate that from here over there. I mean, that you could see that being a huge deterrent for people. And then you kind of pointed it out as well. But I mean, having 3 different agencies in the United States, in 3 different departments, having different aspects of this, I don't know why that was done. Like, I don't know why we just didn't give it all to one and say you get it all and develop the whole thing. And then, and then also, do those agencies even have resources to start implementing this? Or are they going to start saying, I don't have any people for this, I don't have any budget for this, I'm not doing it?
Right. It might even make it harder to comply.
Right. Yeah. It might even send you down into this thing, a morass, where there's supposed to be this framework, but the framework isn't actually being instituted because nobody has any budget or personnel to do it.
or even expertise.
Yeah.
It's one of those new things that are being created out of in the space out of nowhere, in my opinion, where those companies and individuals of high sophistication in the space will exploit it as usual, and then those folks who don't know much about it won't. That article was very interesting because it was obviously written from the perspective on the European Union. I was interested in an analogous article on the U.S. side and talking about the bit parts on our piece of the fence. Dawn, did you see anything on, because it all talked about EU and in their courts and things they have established, but I imagine there's an analogous piece on the U.S. side, correct?
Well, it's really just this October 2022 Biden executive order is probably the U.S. equivalent. I mean, that's what was created in response to some of the issues that were occurring with big companies and getting these exorbitant fines because they're not complying with the GDPR. And so the administration stepped in, tried to have an initial framework, which was ultimately challenged. It was successfully challenged on the European side through their process, and then this was kind of the next phase. But to Anthony's point, also, Ernest, this adequacy decision says that the framework is an essential equivalence. So if you're a business and you follow that framework and you get the Department of Commerce certification that you're following it, as long as you actually do follow it, then you shouldn't theoretically have issues. But to your comment, Ernest, there's already groups in Europe challenging this already. This isn't good enough. We challenge the adequacy decision itself. And so, more to follow. That's what happened with the first go. So we'll see. Mike, it looks like you want to say something.
Yeah, well, I think a lot of this is in response to Europe feeling like they're getting no benefit to allowing what is essentially surveillance capitalism to run relentlessly through their economy. And what is surveillance capitalism? It sounds kind of worse than it is in some cases, but is actually pretty descriptive. Just the idea that you sign into an app and now they just follow everything you do online, make records of it, sell it to data brokers. And we'll get into that, I think, even more in our next article. So one of the things that I thought was interesting and I think really actually important and actually easy to adhere to, that is a giant gaping hole now in all of the EU data security that they've been trying to implement, is even if we control the company's actions, how do we control the third party and the data broker they sell to? And what they're saying here is any third party you interact with has to have the same level of compliance you do. So that actually is going to destroy an entire market of black market data brokers, which, by the way, state actors are the main purchasers and any bulk of that data to use against people. And that's every state, including adversaries. So I think that's actually going to be important even for US citizen data protection. This will kind of lift the bar, at least to that level. In terms of, yes, there will be an economy of swindlers who just kind of come in and give consultant work on this stuff. Everything with data security has been like that since the original days of not Norton antivirus. What was the other one?
McAfee.
Yeah, the guy that went bonkers. So there are people that swear up and down that he created the virus to solve. So I don't think the evidence pans out that way, but that's the level of weirdness you get into when you get into data security. But I think a general level of compliance, if you're not going to share this data with a third party unless they have the same level of security we require from the first party, I think that's a good step in the right direction for everybody worldwide.
Well, it seems like a nice piece for AI to help out with.
Yeah. Yes, let's then take over security and policing of these things for sure.
Let's just put the whole thing into ChatGPT and be done with it.
Yeah, exactly.
It won't be biased.
No, not at all.
All right. So we're going to go on to our fourth article, talking about grounding Chinese drones and the impact. So I think, if you've been in the drone space, this has kind of been the topic du jour for almost, let's say, 5 years,
At
right?
least.
And I think one of the things that I really liked about this article was at first, it's not like an opinion you hear a lot, which is, yeah, actually DJI security is, I mean, there's a record of it being bad. But, these drones being so prevalent is actually, it's really kind of an economic problem too. They are the best on the market because of reliability and affordability. And we haven't come up with an economic solution to that, what is an economic problem. If you want, for defense purposes and security purposes, drones that can compete with the largest Chinese drone manufacturer, really kind of got to invest a little bit lower than what we have been. And I dug into the history of DJI's use at the DOI, which is brought up in this article. And the Department of Interior did a lot of research, and they tried to launch a drone program with DJI drones. They had a special government edition, which was supposedly locked out from being able to phone home. And that actually is the main security concern that comes up. I'm actually going to go to some notes that Dawn wrote here, because I thought they were insightful on the article. Just give me 1 second. Where is it? Okay, here we go. So the author is Fane Greenwood, and I've worked with her before. She spoke at Interdrone, I think, 2017. So Fane actually brings up the incident with Kevin Finister, who discovered security flaw allowing him to access highly sensitive customer data. He tried to report it through the DJI bug bounty program, as far as I know. And then I believe they even tried to sue him, which is kind of an irrational response to somebody putting information into the bug bounty program. The data that was found there was uploaded, driver's license information, photographs uploaded by users, and flight logs from accounts that appeared to belong to military and government workers. I think what's interesting there, though, is that the hole that he found is actually not a specific to drone hole. It's a cloud computing hole and a user opt-in hole. And I guess what this article kind of reminds me of is one of my original arguments about this is, why specifically drones are they the focus and not data security, like what we were talking about before? Because I think it's ultimately data security, and if you can lock a device from phoning home to update its firmware, then actually any of these devices are applicable to even government work. But we need to really kind of go to that level of appraisal before we could say that even the 2 UAS drones are applicable for that work. Any comments, questions, thoughts?
Anthony, go ahead.
Yeah, I have a few comments on this. So I will say, from a standpoint of DroneUp, we actually don't have this issue as much because our vast majority of our business is on drone delivery for Walmart, and we use an American-made drone for that. So that's good and that's great. But the other parts of our business, we largely do use DJI drones and other drones from other companies, and this is becoming an issue because, as the article points out, about all the state bills and the federal legislation that's done on this, and I think this topic has been debated. I think we said at the outset for about at least 5 years, and I guess and it keeps going back to Chinese-made drones. I realize the United States is in this big competition with China, but we're taking the drone of DJI and basically papering it across the entire Chinese drone industry. I don't know that we would tolerate that anywhere else. But we're basically saying, because we don't trust DJI drones, that we don't trust any Chinese-made drone. So that's interesting, I think. were, a whole country of origin issue based on one drone, which hasn't been definitively determined. I mean, the issue that you're talking about is, there's been a security issue, but not necessarily. There's no allegation even in his evidence, and Kevin Finisterre's evidence, that it was actually communicating back on its own. It was just that there was a security flaw that allowed you to get into that data. Well, that security flaw could happen in a lot of different places.
And that it was on GitHub. They rationally posted it publicly on GitHub.
Oh, okay.
So that's how he was able to get in.
Right.
You could take a look back at the evidence of that, but that's how I remember.
Right.
What were you going to say, Don?
Yeah, I've written about this, and I'm certainly not an expert on Chinese law or Chinese, national security. I've gone to Charlie Dunlap, retired Major General, his national security conference at Duke. He's got this incredible speaker. God, I can't remember his name. You listen to this guy and you're just frightened, right? Because the issue here is the civ mil fusion. In other words, there is no, separation between these civilian companies and the government. And so it's not just the information, phoning home. It's the fact that, the government under their laws can walk into any company and say, give us all of this, and like, in the United States, without a warrant, things like this. So I think that's the concern.
But that goes back to cloud computing, Don,
Yeah.
Because if you required, you could say that the physical hardware is 100% manufactured top to bottom Chinese, but my cloud service provider is here in the United States, is bound to U.S. law, actually probably more likely Irish law, because that's where a lot of our servers are for our companies, right? But anyway, the data security there. So then the phoning home is really kind of the point you have to close if you're going to allow the Chinese hardware at all. Because if you can close that point, then you can, and if you can't, then you can't.
Yeah, I'm not gonna. Yeah, go ahead.
Top to bottom.
I want to hear Ernest too. I've got more thoughts that I haven't been able to share, but man, this is such a hot topic. And
this is a hot topic. So
I'm not gonna argue, on the security points, I'm not going to argue them, right? Like, I'm not a cybersecurity expert. All I can tell you is, having had a TSSCI clearance in the United States government, in the environment that we've been in, which is politically toxic, to have both sides of the aisle lock arms on this topic, it kind of tells me something. And again, the fact that the blue UAS was created and all of these things, Congress puts out a statute for the DoD in particular, other people adopt it by policy. And here's the other thing. Other security issues that, might be at a TSSCI level, nobody's going to be talking about those in the public, right? They're just not. And we've seen espionage right, left, and sideways from the Chinese government across all kinds of different businesses, hacks, routine hacks, and these are flying computers. So that's all I'm going to say about that. And Ernest, I'd love to hear your thoughts.
Yeah, so from my perspective, it's very, I'm not a big anti-China person, but I'm pro-America. So my very first drone event that I went to was a DJI event. And I went in there, I was like, oh, this is amazing, right? So I came out of that pro-DJI. But then I come out of it hearing about the lack of U.S. manufacturing in the space. And my pro-American inclinations raised their hackles then. And I'm saying, why aren't we leading or dominant in that manufacturing piece? And that's because DJI got ahead of it, right? And in my opinion, a ban, and I know in the current state of things, a ban is really disadvantage to a lot of folks using these technologies. I mean, they've been using them for years. It's less cost. It doesn't cost as much. It's cheaper to use, and they're very effective tools, right? But in order for the U.S. to catch up on that IP, I think the ban is essential for us to get up on the manufacturing piece of drones and make sure our technology catches up to what they're doing. So I think, and then the security piece, I mean, Don mentioned it, that the espionage piece from China is huge. It's in every sector of the government, every sector in what we're doing here in America. Not enough people are counter to it. And China's just doing what they're supposed to do, just like I know America's doing what they're doing elsewhere. So in my opinion, the ban piece, I mean, in the short term, I mean, the current term and short term is really detrimental to what folks are trying to do. But I think in terms of national security, I think it's important. Like Dawn said, if they're all kumbayaing over this one particular issue, I'm gonna be on their side on this piece, and hopefully we can get our act together in terms of manufacturing, getting Americans working on making these aircraft, getting jobs associated in that sector, and then getting on, on tops in terms of that technology. And China's trying to outclass us in every technical sector. They want to do every advanced tech that we're already doing, and then to remain competitive, we got to do these kind of things.
Yeah, I mean, we've talked about the CHIPS Act and how important that is as like a kind of a first step. But, I think everybody here on the panel would like to see even more investment. And I actually, I think that's actually what I liked about this piece too, is that actually no matter what direction you're coming from, whether you want to keep using your DJI drone, whether you want to argue over the security endpoints or where is the critical point of cutoff, actually everybody seems to be agreeing we need more economic investment in this technology if we want to see the results we want. And I think, all of these kind of different vectors we're coming from, as long as they meet on that point, we will actually get to the future that we want. For this.
Yeah, the article did mention direct government subsidies for those folks replacing their DJI drones. I think that's necessary as well. You're going to tell people they got to chuck these thousands of dollar equipment, then you got to give them a mechanism to do so, or to replace it.
Right. Else it's tyranny. Right.
Well,
we don't put our thumb on the scale.
There's some good recommendations in here. I'm going to hit them real super quick. Look, you rethink the bans, but if you have them, have a reasonable phase out. I mean, that makes sense, right? In other words, don't go cold turkey and just say, okay, 2 months from now, all your, you got to ground your entire fleet. And that's what we saw, I believe, in Florida, right? This was not gradual. This was like, here's your point, here's your date. And after this, everybody's, grounded. Financial support, as Ernest said, Blue List being more inclusive. Well, yeah, but to, who said it? I don't know if it was Anthony or Ernest. Or Mike, honestly, I can't remember which one of you said this, but the fact that, is this another, we need funding for this. Oh, it was the last article, agencies, the DIU, they created this thing out of nothing, and they're under-resourced. There's no funding. I think there was just a little bit of an infusion of funding into this program more recently, but when it started, there was no funding. And, to be more inclusive, yeah, sure. But again, it's a pull. Agencies have to say, this is the kind of technology we want. The Blue team doesn't sit there and hatch up like we're just now going to have Blue 3.0. They need somebody out there to say, we need these kinds of drones for this mission. And then they put out the call. That they're like just an in-between kind of a go-to.
I think the Blue UAS thing is a mismatch, actually.
Yeah.
I think I think they've properly raised security concerns and an evaluation protocol, but I think that there needs to be an organization that's completely commercially focused. If you're going to do that,
is that AUVSI green? I don't know.
Maybe, and I think that's kind of part of the hope behind that. And we'll see, but the company has to opt into that, though, right? That's not a requirement.
Yeah, and how
that's
again,
like something
what's the criteria for approval? Is that transparent?
So yeah, and if it was different, where the government said, "Hey, for government use, we will allow you to apply this standard, and we'll take it as good as if it came from us," then I think we'd start being somewhere, in the right direction on this. Yeah, there was something else I was going to bring up, Don, but you were articulating. I didn't want to stop where you were going.
I'm sorry, I was on a roll. I want to say one more thing, and I want Anthony and Ernest to close us out, if that's possible. Drone Life had a great article recently. Also, a new Drone Advocacy Alliance fights against the bans on Chinese drone technology. The Drone Advocacy Alliance. Okay. So interesting. Again, this is just lobbying straight up. Who's in this? Shocking, DJI. I thought it was interesting. Of course, the Drone Service Providers Alliance, Blue Nose Aerial Imaging, which is out of Denver, run by Tanner Harris. He was on our Donna Drones podcast, and Drone Link and Drone Sense. There, that was the list. It's not a big list. I didn't see the Commercial Drone Alliance or some of these other groups on there, right? Because they're not going to be on that. But again, I haven't seen what they're pushing out, just that they created this alliance. I would like to read and know better what their actual position is. If it's just like, let us have our drones and do whatever we want, or is it more like this author was like, well, maybe there's a middle ground here hey, what about US and infusing some money into our own economy? So I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, I understand DJI taking a position like that, because to not would be to infer criminality, right? But I'm not sure why. I assume they're mostly economic, right? Why anybody else was on that train? They might feel like they would be put out of business because there wouldn't be enough of a timeline, and I think that is a big concern that should be understood. If we're going to take any action, this is something the United States doesn't do often, is put their thumb on the scale of the economy, even if it has a defense reason. We're not apt to do this often, and not without cause. So I think there's going to be more discussion soon as the states start rolling out things. Ernest, Anthony, want to take last licks on this?
Yeah, I'd say two things, which is, I know that the issues that people were talking about in relation to this issue of technology that's coming from China and government supported, which is all valid. It's just, if this is truly a big of an issue as we all think it is, then it's more than just drones.
Yeah, it's your phone, it's your laptop.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know why this issue is just focused on the drone when we should be talking about a myriad of other types of technology equipment that could have the same issue with it then. And then, I mean, just to reiterate the other point, I mean, having, as I mentioned, our business uses American-made drones, but scalability of an operation and manufacturing a scalable drone here in the United States is still an issue. And it's not going to become any better until there's some government program to help facilitate that and incentivize people to develop more manufacturing here in the States.
Earlier I mentioned law of unintended consequences, and I think we did some trade deals decades ago that put us in this position where we removed all of our manufacturing base and we put it elsewhere. And this is just a byproduct of that. Now, and Anthony, you mentioned that drones are at the forefront of that issue, but I think there are other technologies that are at the top of that issue. I think we work in aviation, we're in the drone space, so it's at the top of our mind. But you look at microchip technology, United States has really ramped up their stake in that technology. Now we got new microchip plants going up in the States like never before. The battery tech, all the higher end technologies, the United States now has earmarked as priorities in competition with Canada, and they've been doing various things to stunt, either try to stunt China's growth or China's entrance into U.S. market. And I think that stuff's going to continue to go. I don't think it's a xenophobic thing. I just think as Americans, we need our jobs back. We need manufacturing jobs back here in this country. Young men are suffering in this country. It's not talked about a lot, but that traditional base, those jobs that young men used to have in the country, those manufacturing jobs, those hands-on jobs, those were replaced by desk jobs that dudes, and I say dudes loosely, they're not taking those jobs. And typically men are more averse to going to college. They want to do stuff hands-on. So
yeah, and that's increasing too.
And it's definitely increasing. So the fact of the matter is we need manufacturing jobs, and that drone piece is one of them. But on the autonomous aircraft piece, we work in that space. We want all that manufacturing to go here in the States for the same reason. eVTOLs, the electric vehicles, electric ground vehicles, all that stuff. I have a stated interest in getting manufactured here in the States simply because it gets young men and women jobs.
Yeah, great point, Ernest, and thank you I think that's a wonderful way to close out the episode. And I think we would love to see some manufacturing, especially in the drone space, because we're drone fan boys and girls here. So yeah, hopefully we'll see it. Hopefully this is just the first foray into that. Dawn, what do we got coming up this weekend next? Lots of exciting stuff. Right?
Yep, so much going on Wednesday. Dawn of Drones. We got Defense Solutions talking about airport security. So check that out, 9 a.m. Mountain AVSI channels. Thursday, we've got our Drone Law Connections with Maggie Schuster. That's going to involve Craig Husselby from Synergy Aviation. They do long line linear pipe inspections up in Canada, so really interesting. And then, next week we have a special broadcast, Law Tech Connect, talking about security, counter UAS in particular, Monday. So register for that on my website, P3 Tech Consulting. That will be a special broadcast of this amazing panel we had at AVSI Exponential. So check that out.
All right. And I just want to say thank you to our sponsors, Rubric Law, Aero Vigilant, DroneUp, and CSG Strategies. I want to thank our guests for joining us today, both Ernest and Anthony, and some amazing perspectives they brought. Very thoughtful commentary. Really appreciate it. And also thank you to the audience for watching. We see you all out there. And that's it for this week. We are out here.